isn't somewhat
right.
understandable to...
We're live, and you spoiled my intro because I was going to do something. Never mind.
Sorry, what was your intro going to be?
All right, everyone pretending I'm coming in right now, and this is when I was just going to go like, and then I was going to say something like, hey, I don't have any theme music because, so I'm just improvising, and you ruined it. Thanks so much.
You were gonna go all Beavis and Butthead for the intro.
I was just gonna improv some intro music, but well. All right, we got the two Darths in here today. If you've heard of the two Ronnies, this is the two Darths. So how y'all doing?
Doing well, Shane.
Oh yeah, that was Ronnie Corbett and Ronnie Barker. That's your classic British comedy there.
Oh.
Yeah. And
I know about
Purple
the Smother
Wolf
Brothers, but that's about it.
Oh yeah, Purple Wolf and JC Armitage so far in the chat. Yeah, so this is the.
Oh yeah, Armitage always shows up in the chat.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the one where we don't really have a subject in mind. This is just where I can kind of hang out live with the patrons and supporters and co-hosts, and then y'all can jump in the chat and we'll see what's going on. So how have y'all been?
Good. Either you get Disney Plus.
Nah, I'm not sure we're gonna get that.
Mandalorian's looking good.
From what I understand, they're gonna have Disney Plus be their kid stuff and leave Hulu for their adult stuff.
Yeah.
You know, even if the Mandalorian is good, I'm not gonna buy anything Star Wars related because I'm just gonna put this here about the Disney canon. The Disney canon is so stupid that even if there's something good in it, it doesn't matter because it's like yeah, but Rey is still canon. So it's like why bother? Here's another thing, Shane. They released a quote-unquote woke comic for Star Wars where basically Palpatine wasn't really in charge of the Emperor. It was actually a woman who was in charge of the Empire, apparently.
Rainbow Asteroids, I missed 2 minutes. You didn't miss too much. You just missed Christopher messing up my intro.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't keep his mouth shut.
But yeah, I find that hard to believe. It's like Palpatine is being controlled by a woman. And no, it's not Slymore. It's some different woman. It's like...
I don't know. I'm beyond caring.
Yeah, like
the original trilogy was good because George Lucas listened to a lot of other, directors. And, I mean, in the second one, he just turned it over to, oh God, who was it who directed the second one? Was it Irving Kershner?
I don't know who it was.
But I mean, it's like
he actually wanted to get Steven Spielberg to do Return of the Jedi,
yeah.
But Spielberg, if I recall correctly, he was both unavailable because he was filming, I think it was E.T. at the time, and also he was a member of the Directors Guild, and Lucas was kind of in conflict with them at the time, so they wouldn't allow him.
But I mean, from what I understand, the first Star Wars, the only reason that's any good is because of Brian De Palma. Because he showed it to, I think, Brian De Palma and Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola, his first cut of it. And apparently it was pretty terrible, and so they gave him all sorts of notes, and I think De Palma kind of took him under his wing and says, okay, let's just completely re-edit this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think George Lucas, he's good as a storyteller, and I do think if you're going to make a Star Wars movie, you should have him, as your... as the main writer and all that, just leave the director to someone who's better at editing. Because, to be fair, the prequel trilogies, they're good at telling a consistent story. The problem is that they needed better editing and script writing. Like, there's a lot of stuff in Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones that easily could have been removed and replaced with something more interesting.
Well, I mean, there's so much about the original trilogy that could have been more interesting. I mean, Anakin's whole story arc was just completely predictable from start to finish.
Yeah.
There weren't any surprises or twists or anything. Yeah. You could have done something where, instead of just this, cardboard cutout villain origin story, you had something where he was trying to do the right thing and trying to reform the Jedi or whatever, and ended up despite himself going over the dark side. That would have been interesting, but
Yeah, with the, I will say this though, even though as predictable as it is, it's still telling a story, whereas with the new trilogy, it's like they're just making it up as they go along.
Yeah. And I do not know who Richard D. Schiff is, so I can't help you there, Toothpick.
Mm.
Darth Vega already picked Bitcoin over Dogecoin. Is Dogecoin
I remember
Dogecoin
that
still in active development?
I don't know, but I don't know about Dogecoin, but I did remember watching a podcast one time. I wasn't on it, but basically, and one guy said, government money, you're doing something wrong when Dogecoin, a coin that nobody accepts and probably isn't even in production anymore, is more valuable than a government issued currency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just like Bitcoin because it was the first one I heard of, and
Yeah.
I actually did make some money on it, so I
Well,
always have a soft
the
spot for Bitcoin.
well, it was the first cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Hey,
But
Shane,
too bad Blockstream has taken it over and it's all gone to pot. But
I will say this, though, Shane, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard about people arguing against the gold standard. They're like, yeah, but we're going to run out of gold eventually. And when we run out of gold, then that means we have to stop producing money. And if we stop producing money, we'll all collapse. It's like, what?
Yeah, the couple of problems that
people.
The couple of problems that Monero has is, first of all, it has a really toxic community that is just it's unbelievably toxic. And the second is it doesn't really have any use cases. And I really think if you want a privacy coin like that, go with BitTube, because it's a fork of Monero, but it actually has use cases in it. So
is Monero truly anonymous like they claim it is?
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm still figuring out how to convert my BitTubes into cash, because I have heard you can do that, but I can't figure it out.
Oh, you can do it in the extension. You put in your you have to put in like your bank account details, and then you can transfer it. Yeah. But you can do that in the extension. I
think it might be a good idea to do that, since I'm currently transitioning from my old job to a new one. So
yeah,
hopefully.
I don't know if this would be the best time though, because BitTube has been like down under a penny, and people are predicting that once the website goes, the price of tube is going to take off. But
yeah, I know, but still,
yeah,
it doesn't hurt to consider the option, just something to make a little cash on the side, so I have like a little something, rainy day money.
Yeah,
and it's Killian coin.
That's another funny thing too, Shane, is when people say, "Oh, cryptocurrency's at an all-time low. That means it's going to fail soon," and it jumps right back up. And in all honesty, the fact that it does occasionally fall but rise up, that actually shows it's more stable than the dollar, because it's being affected by the market.
Well, and it never went to an all-time low, because you had that big run up, in the bull year. And then when it crashed, and then everyone crashed and said, "Oh, it's the lowest it's ever been." It had only crashed to where it was like, I think it was like 16 months before its peak or something like that. It didn't even go back 2 years. It just kind of undid that. What was it? Was it 2017 that was that big bull year?
I mean,
just quick exchange like Shapeshift to Litecoin and put that in a Coinbase account. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Shapeshift has BitTube yet, but some of the others do. Trade Ogre does, and a couple of others.
Okay, can I speak now?
Yeah.
I was about to say, one thing I've been reading a lot, because a lot of statists have brought it up. I've been reading a lot about Enron. And they're all like, "Oh, but without big government, what's going to stop a second Enron?" Well,
government was the whole reason for Enron.
What?
Government was the whole reason for Enron.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, the reason why those blackouts occurred was literally because the government gave Enron a monopoly on the area.
Well, it wasn't really a monopoly, but they put in all sorts of restrictions, like you couldn't import power from out of state. You had to go through all this stuff to build new power plants, so you really had restrictions on how the supply increased. And then they put price caps on consumer power. And of course, price caps create shortages, and with electricity shortages means rolling blackouts and things like that.
And from what I read, contrary to popular belief, Enron wasn't really a scam per se. Rather, it was just a very, very badly organized company, and they just lied about how bad they were.
Well, and it wasn't even that. I mean, it was mostly manufacturersy, and like it was all around, Ken Lay, and he was dumping his Enron stock. What he was actually doing was he was selling his Enron stock to cover his medical bills. Because he had health problems. In fact, he didn't survive to get to trial because he died of a heart attack.
Yeah.
But I mean, what, the guy can't sell his stock to pay for medical bills?
I mean, one thing I would, the thing from what I've read about Enron, really, which, again, it's not really a scam per se as people thought it was. It's not like they were ripping people off. They were providing, a legitimate service. They were just doing a piss poor job at it.
Well, they were propped up by the state of California, and they'd been subsidized, and all this protectionism from them, and that's what you get with that.
Not to mention, they gave a guy a $10 million bonus for an idea concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had this idea for streaming movies and all. It's like, oh, that's a good idea. We're gonna pay you a $10 million bonus before actually figuring out how to implement it and see if it was profitable, because while the technology did exist to stream videos back in those days, it was way behind and nowhere near as profitable as it would have been. But
it was basically real media. I don't know if I gave anyone some flashbacks by doing that. Bad flashbacks to real media, man. Oh god, that was terrible.
I don't remember real medium, but I do remember dial-up internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you had to wait 5 minutes of your computer going before you could go on Google.
I want to download a JPEG, so let me go get a sandwich while it's doing that,
Hey Shane, I showed one of your videos to one of my socialist friends, and the first thing that came out of his mouth about it was that Shane sounds like a very angry dude.
Yeah, that's what they say.
When you hear the same stupid, previously, debunk stuff over and over and over again, yeah, you'd be angry.
Yeah, no one who actually knows me would tell you that I'm an angry person. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
They're just looking for excuses to dismiss you.
Oh yeah, like yeah. I cannot tell you how many times I show people your videos and they're like, I'm not gonna trust that guy because he's mean and he's loud.
I'm not even that loud. I just mix the volume, up pretty high because, because I know, like, I like to listen to podcasts and stuff like that in the car, and there's so much other noise around from, just the road and all the other cars and everything that some of those podcasts are really, really quiet and it's hard to hear what's going on. And it's like, okay, I have it turned up all the way and I still can't hear it. So I kind of jack mine up on the theory that you can always turn it down. Yeah. All right. Maybe BTC was in a bubble. They had been saying that ever since BTC came out. I mean, it was like, if the price is going up, it's in a bubble. If it's going down, it's crashing. If it's fluctuating, then it's unstable, and if it stays the same, then it's stagnant. So they got their response for everything.
Hey Shane, it's another dumb thing I've heard some stated. They say that one thing. The reason why we should over entertainment is because look at the BBC in America. You get very little commercials, so you don't get interrupted, and that's because it's government funded. It's like, yeah, and the BBC also won biggest bogon emitter, posted a lot of bull crap because they have no competition.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have competition, but it's just, if they would stick to just producing TV shows, they wouldn't be so bad. But they have to do all this other stuff. Let's see. Things are scrolling up here. Let's see. Now, idiot statists are using Enron as an excuse for the state to take over electric companies. Of course they are.
That earlier, Enron was more or less a partially,
power companies in this country are pretty much quasi-governmental organizations because they have their monopoly power from the government. And...
Yeah, speaking of which, I saw my dad today because my sad news, my grandpa passed away this morning, and 2 days ago, we wanted to see him in his final moments, because he was dying and we knew that, and I got to see my dad, and we did discuss politics a little bit, and I was talking about, the UK and all that, and I was telling them about how bad the UK healthcare system is, and my dad's like, yeah, well, that's how it is here too, only instead of the NHS, it's, the insurance company. And I had to point out to him, yeah, Dad, because we're trying to imitate what the UK is doing.
Yep. Sorry for your loss, by the way.
Yeah, it's okay. We knew he was dying. I mean, not to get too TMI, but 2 days ago when I saw him when he was alive only in the loosest sense of the term.
Yeah.
Basically, he was breathing and that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really sad when it happens that way, when you just have to watch them just kind of waste away like that. That's what it was like with my stepdad, and it was kind of a mercy when he went.
I mean, I don't want to bring up this controversial stuff, but I do think,
controversial stuff here on this channel? No, we don't do that.
Well, the stuff I'm talking about is assisted suicide, because I do think in some scenarios, just giving them a massive overdose of painkiller meds and sleeping medicines, it's a lot better than just keeping them hooked up to machines and, they're like all they can do is breathe and occasionally twitch and that's it,
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't say this, for obvious reasons, but when I saw my grandpa and the state he was in 2 days ago, I was just like, you know what? If that ever happens to me, I'm just gonna write this down on my will. If that ever happens to me, just shoot me. Just get it over with.
It would still be murder according to the law.
Yeah, Yeah, it says right here in my will. If I am in that stage where I'm just a vegetable, I'm alive but not living, and I'm pretty much already gonna die anyway, just go to my closet, grab one of my guns, and just put it to my head and just pull the trigger. Just get it over with.
But I mean, the thing is, what the people who are against assisted suicide say is like, well, if he really wants to die, he can you just show him where the dial is and just have him put. How's he supposed to do that? If you're that
some
far
of those
down,
people
you
that are
can't turn
dying
the dial.
literally can't do it because they're too weak.
Or they're unconscious or can't move or whatever.
Yeah, like ALS, I mean, if a guy, who has ALS in the advanced stage and he really wants to die, well, he can't do that because he literally can't move the majority of his body.
Yep.
Like,
what were you going to say, Vega?
Yeah, how's he supposed to, put a gun to his head and do that? I mean, theoretically, he could, he could drive his, electric scooter, into a swimming pool or anything, but that's not a pleasant way to die.
What were you going to say, Vega?
Oh, I was just going to say, according to the left, if you just put the gun next to your head and just leave it there, they'll probably shoot you on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, because guns just magically go off.
Yeah, that's how it happens, of course.
That's another thing we see in movies, like someone accidentally knocks the gun over and it just lightly taps and it gets set off, and I'm just like, You do realize that before they send guns out to the market, they actually test them for that. They actually take them to an arena, they hook it up to a device, they put a round in the chamber and turn the safety off, and they drop it to see if it will turn on its own. And if it does discharge like that, they don't put it on the market. They recall it and say, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah, they do.
What is your opinion of external safety, Shane?
What do you mean, like external safeties?
Like on a 1911, you have to disengage the safety in order to fire it.
Well, yeah.
Or compared to like a Glock that doesn't have one of those, it has some like trigger safeties and stuff.
Yeah, the Glock's trigger safety. I mean, what's the point? Because if something interferes with the thing, it pulls back the trigger, then the safety is not gonna do any good. And there have been cases of Glocks, going off like that. So, yeah, it's better to have a manual safety. So.
Yeah. I will say, because I'm hoping to visit Kitsune in the UK, hopefully next year on Valentine's Day, and I have told them one thing I mean, I'm not saying the UK is full of robbers and all that, but they have been having issues with that. And the problem with the UK is that if a guy comes up to you and he says, I'm going to rip your effing throat open, and you punch him unconscious in self-defense, the British are going to say, hey, you assaulted that man.
Yeah. Pikachu has an interesting idea, an island paradise for those who are about to die and their loved ones to spend their last days together. I like that idea. Yeah. You just go out there.
Yeah, it's better than what we Better than what we currently have.
Yeah, instead of this dreary old hospital room, you got like this 5-star hotel type of thing. And
to be fair, the reason why a lot of elderly homes are like that is the exact same reason why a lot of hospitals are understaffed and overcrowded, because there's an artificial shortage of them because of all these regulations.
Yeah, I wonder if it would work legally speaking. I'm not advocating this before anyone decides to get ban happy or anything, but just pondering if it would work if you did it like on a cruise ship and you went out to international waters and you had something where you could do an assisted suicide thing there. I wonder what the legalities are of that would be. Would the home country still claim that, well, that's our citizen you killed, so it's still murder, or how would that work?
Yeah. I've actually heard that actually has happened a few times. It's rare, but there have been a couple of cases where there have been people murdered, on cruise ships in international waters, and they're like, well, what are we going to do? Because technically they weren't in any country, they were in international territory. What do we do?
Well, I mean, it would be the jurisdiction of the international courts. Yeah, and I mean, you would still be able to prosecute someone for murder that way, but would assisted suicide count?
Yeah.
Do you think seasteading will take off?
I don't know. I mean, governments are not going to let it if they have anything to say about it. Because you had that couple that was in international water and Thailand just said, nope, we're shutting you down.
Yep. Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, even though they were technically international waters, the Thailand junta was just like, screw the rules. We make our own, and just shot them down anyway.
Well, what they were saying was that, okay, they were in international waters, but they were close to the routes that ships go when they're trading, which was the idea. They would be, that they would be close to that where they could, go on the hard, as they say, whenever they wanted to. But they said just because they were close to their shipping lanes and their travel lanes and all that, that's what gave them jurisdiction. So
I will say this, Shane, kind of this whole thing about the state and all that, I lost a lot of respect for this one YouTuber called Telltale Atheist, because he did a video one time where he interviewed the guy, who was in the bite model. And guess what? The guy who proposed the bite model to tell about cults, he considers libertarians to be a political cult.
Wow.
I actually pointed this out in the comments section. I'm like, dude, libertarians are the political equivalent of atheists, because we don't believe that an all-powerful state is controlling everything necessary. And of course, one guy said, no, you're like flat earthers because a state actually exists. And I'm like, so?
What does the state existing have to do with our complaint?
Yeah, it's like, you know what I wanted to tell that guy? By that logic, then Christianity is real, because we do know the Vatican exists. The Pope is.
We know churches exist.
Real.
Preachers exist. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it doesn't matter whether or not the physical people behind it exist. It's a matter of do they believe that there's some supernatural, powerful entity?
Yeah.
That's actually why, believe it or not, LaVeyan Satanism isn't considered a cult, because, believe it or not, the guy who made it himself was actually an atheist and flat out said it's not intended to be a religion, it's more of a philosophy.
Well, it was a combination of that and trolling Christians.
Yeah,
But there is no such thing as a satanic cult. There is no satanic religion.
Yeah. In fact, LaVeyan Saint in his Bible, it flat out says you are not to hurt others. Basically it says, it actually has a lot of libertarian philosophies. Like, it has a rule that says, as long as you don't harm others. So,
yeah, that's Gardnerian Wicca has the same thing, and it harm none, do as thou wilt. Yeah, so I mean, all these different philosophies keep converging towards the nap. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's still
you're dropping
like
out. You're dropping out, Fenrir.
Oh, well, I was about to say, he was kind of kooky in the beginning, because if I recall correctly, he did believe in things like magic, but over time it's changed. So now, like I said, it's more of an anti-religious philosophy than it actually is. And believe it or not, a lot of self-described, LaFeyan Satanists, they don't even believe in Satan. They're just as a giant middle finger to every single established organized religion in the world.
The only person who could possibly be a Satanist is a Christian, because they're the only ones who believe that Satan exists. You know,
Yeah,
if you
I
think about
know.
it, that's kind of what it has to be.
I will
Yeah.
say, I can hear Fenrir just fine. So it must be something on your end, Shane.
Well, I could hear him fine. He was just dropping out.
Yeah, I've been just cutting in and out. My connection can be crappy like that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's not roboting like it has been doing in
yeah.
previous months.
But it's still sad that, Telltale Atheist, a guy who I really respect because he's really good when he's debunking cults, yet he goes out and says he's a Bernie supporter and he believes that well, we can't have an extreme of neither and all that. We need to have a quote unquote balance. And I'm like,
Yeah, we
that
need to
never
have a
works.
balance between lots of rape and no rape. You know, you need the balance.
Yeah, it's
Don't
like,
be an extremist. You're saying all rape's bad? No.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why, contrary to popular belief, centricism never works, is because at the end of the day, it's all force. It's like, I mean, I think a perfectly good example of your example is what happens when the United States wants to seek military action against a country, but they don't actually want to go to war with them. So they're like, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to go to war with them or are we not at war with them? So basically tell them, okay, country, we're not at war with you, but we're still going to send drones and drop bombs on you.
Yeah,
I say that buying a gun should be as easy as Amazon.com.
there you go.
Yeah, and everyone's like, oh, but if we can buy guns on eBay, it'll turn to the Wild West and people will kill each other over road rage incidents. And it's like,
If it turns into the Wild West, it will be more peaceful than it's been in this country in a long time.
yeah, I mean, I actually said this earlier. The reason why places like schools are being targeted by terrorists is really it's not because it's too easy to get guns. It's just because hypothetically speaking, if I'm a psychopathic terrorist, a school is a perfect target because, it's guaranteed to have the least resistance. It's got a predictable layout and number of students, and there's guaranteed to be people in there.
Well, if you arm people in the school, that alone is a deterrent for a mass shooter. Like they don't want to shoot out. They're not going to even try.
Well, because Utah had like 15, 20 years ago passed this thing where any teacher who, I'm not sure if it's just teachers or anyone who works at the school or whatever, but any teacher who has a concealed carry permit can carry a firearm in a school. And since then, 0 mass shootings. None of the crazy stories of, oh, what if a kid, grabs a gun from a teacher? No. Stop being stupid.
Because the teachers are so stupid,
Well, if that's the case, then I mean, I don't want to say they deserve it, but you're asking for that to happen. That's another thing too. I hear a lot is when we hear stories of children finding their parents' gun and shooting their little brother or sister. Now they exaggerate it, but it does happen. But at the same time, I still say, well, that's the parents' fault because if you're a gun owner and you have small children in the house, it's your responsibility as a parent to sit the kids down and tell them, look, see those guns? There's daddy's guns. They're very dangerous and you shouldn't be playing with them. They're not toys. They're very dangerous. You should be doing that.
Yeah, well, and also remember, this country has 330 million people in it. There are going to be some crazy edge cases when you get that many people.
Yeah,
And you mentioned
like
the OK Corral. Really, when I was looking back on it, because the OK Corral got spread around in dime novels and stuff like that. But what most people think they know about it is from the 1950s movie. And I was reading on this a while back. Apparently, it wasn't even associated with the OK Corral until that movie, because it didn't actually happen at the OK Corral.
And here's another thing too. There's a lot of evidence that shows it was the lawmen acting the aggressors.
Oh yeah,
if I recall correctly.
In fact, two of the so-called outlaws, 2 of them weren't even armed, and they ran off.
Basically, what happened was that, from what I've read, what happened was that there was a disagreement earlier because Wyatt Earp had beat up, the brother of one of the outlaws, and then his brother Virgil got wind, that they were open carrying, Winchester rifles, which at the time was actually surprisingly was illegal. They did actually have gun control laws back then. So Virgil, got Wyatt and Doc Holliday to go over there. And however, though, Virgil didn't want to fight. He actually gave up his own gun and just grabbed a cane to show he didn't want to fight. And he just flat out said, and he just told the outlaws, just it's like, look, we're just here to tell you, you're openly carrying guns, you can't do that, just put them away in your horses and we'll be all good. And apparently the outlaw, said, okay, we will, and he took out his revolvers to put him away. But Doc Holliday thought, cocked his shotgun. One of the guys thought, it's like, wait a minute, what the hell are you doing? But he pulled out the shotgun and aimed it at one of the outlaws. The outlaw thought his life was in danger, and Virgil tried to stop Doc and say, hey, I don't want this. But by that point, Wyatt had opened fired, and it led from there.
And one of them already had his gun stowed in his horse, and when the shooting started, he was shot when he turned around to reach into his saddlebag to get it. But yeah, Pikachu, check your weapons in thing. I think that was the law in Tombstone. When you came in, you had a reasonable amount of time to go to an inn and check your weapons there, and because you weren't allowed to carry your weapons in there. But what do you do when you're pistol whipped by whichever it was, Wyatt, I think, and then another one of you is threatened by Doc Holliday, so what do you do when you're in legitimate fear for your life? Yeah, and by the way, they were outlaws. You know what the word outlaw means? Because everyone thinks it means criminals, people who had broken the law. No. An outlaw was someone who did not have the protection of the law. Yeah. And that was what it was with a lot of these ranchers and cowboys, since they were outside of the cities and towns and out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, they were within the United States, but they weren't under a local jurisdiction. They were basically on their own. It was basically anarchy because, technically they were under protection of the United States government, but unless your ranch was located next, to a U.S. cavalry scouting outpost, there really wasn't anything you could do.
Yeah, I mean, you could call them and they might be there in a day or two. I mean, that would be. So that's what an outlaw was.
Back in those days, if if a local Indian tribe was to conduct a raid on your ranch, you had to send a messenger out to the cavalry. Which is under attack by Indians.
Yeah, you're dropping out again.
Okay, we couple of men, and by the time they send the men out, well, they find you're
dropping out again, Fenrir.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was just saying, even back in those days, the government was slow to respond. Although, to their defense, the reason why they were slow back in those days was due to lack of technology.
Yeah.
I guess when I dropped out, if your ranch was under attack by Indians, it could take.
You had to send a message by horse, basically.
Yeah, it would take a day or two for the horse and buggy, to get to the cavalry ranch, saying, hey.
Well, no, you just had messenger riders. They just get on a fast horse and ride.
Yeah. Yeah, it could take like a day or so, for the messenger to get to the U.S. cavalry scout post and say, Mr. Bernstein's branch is under attack by Sioux Indians. We got to send help. And by the time they get there, like I said, your ranch is burnt down and you're scalped.
Well, that's like, what was his name? Caesar Rodney, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. They kind of needed his signature to get Delaware because it was unanimous. And he was at like a meeting of the Delaware legislature, and so the Delaware delegation had, sent this real fast rider to give him the message, and then he did his favorite, midnight ride. He basically, it took him overnight to go from Dover, Delaware to Philadelphia, and he basically got in there just in time for the vote. So that was the kind of speeds they were dealing with then.
Yeah, but I was about to say this, Shane. At least back in those days, they had a legitimate excuse for being slow, whereas today it's like they seem to be slow just for the sake of being slow.
Yeah, they got these big, fast police cars, but you could probably get there about the same amount of time on a fast horse, yeah.
Yeah, And and here's another thing too that people always talk about police. Even if we have the number of cops, as what happened in the school shooting in Florida, just because you call a cop and say, hey, there's a guy trying to break into my house, just because he gets there doesn't mean it's not like the movie where like he's gonna rush in and he's gonna enter that epic intense thing where he's going around looking for the criminal, then a fist fight breaks out. That almost never happens. Usually when they arrive on the scene, the very first thing they do is, okay, officer on scene, what do I do now? And the typical response is just hang out there, keep an eye on things, and wait for more backup to arrive. But they don't actually go in and do anything.
Well, that's Warren versus DC. That's what that was all about. Because the cops were there, they didn't even do anything. They didn't even try to enter and stop them.
Yeah,
Didn't Columbine take like 3 hours for the SWAT to finally get to everyone?
yeah,
Okay, some Russian person just subscribed, so thank you.
yeah. I was a Yeah, actually, Shane, about that Warren versus DC thing. I was reading that case out of curiosity, and it's pretty funny because it's like the police basically let this guy get robbed and raped, and they wouldn't even take information. And their question was, "Well, we have a community at whole to protect." And I'm like, so how is not taking down this guy's information so at least you can be out looking for him? How's that? How's that protecting the community?
Yeah. Because, well, we protect the community. That doesn't mean we protect the people in the community. And it's like, wait a minute. Yeah.
Well, then, what are you doing?
It's like, we're going to protect the forest, but we don't really care about the trees.
Yeah. Well, people fail to realize, contrary to popular belief, the concept of police, I mean, yeah, there have been, like some organized police forces since like the Roman times, like the Praetorian Guard, they acted as a police force for Rome, but the idea of a uniform police unit, that's like only like 200 or 300 years old.
Yeah, I mean, we went through most of human civilization without police as we know them.
Yeah, people fail to realize. I think Lord T. Hawkeye pointed out in a really old video of his, like 90% of human history has been anarchy.
Yeah, I mean, even
Well,
when
I mean,
even
you
when it
engage in
hasn't been,
anarchy.
even when it hasn't been anarchy, even when there's been a government, it's not like there have been, police patrolling the streets and protecting people and things like that. I mean, if
Well,
you were a farmer or something like that in, medieval England, you could basically live almost your entire life without even knowing the government existed.
and every time you go to Walmart, you're engaging in anarchy. There's no government involved in you getting in, well, except for taxes,
Yeah,
of course. But
it's not like the Soviet Union where they tell you where to shop and all that. You just get up and I mean, same thing. I mean, just getting up and deciding where to go out for breakfast if you're having a breakfast date with your friends. It's like there's no government telling you which restaurant to go to. That's why I hate people that love to that think they got libertarians by saying, "Oh, well, if you're gonna get rid of government, what are you gonna replace it with?" That's a trap
Well,
that
if
a
you
lot of
cut out a
libertarians.
cancerous tumor, what do you replace it with?
Yeah. Well, I say a lot of libertarians do sometimes fall for that trap, which is why I take your advice from atheism versus libertarianism, and I just say we don't owe you anything, because we don't claim to know anything.
Yeah.
You
When you
know,
get a haircut, what do you replace it with?
yeah.
It's a
government
nonsense
of
question.
government of the gaps.
Yeah.
It's even funny when you're dealing with those Marxists and they're always talking about inherent value, and you brought up the haircut. It's like, well, by that logic, then why the hell do I pay for my haircut? Because I mean, the guy's not quote unquote giving me anything. He's just cutting my hair. But you know what? So what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, without slaves, how would we pick the cotton? Yeah, who's going to pick cotton? That's a good one.
By the way, Shane, this actually happened. One thing I hear a lot about people who love those anti-technology people is they blame the cotton gin for slavery in the South. It's like, oh, because of the cotton gin, they bought more slaves to do more work.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, I know.
That makes no sense.
Yeah.
If anything, it was, the cotton gin and other things like that were making it less financially viable to keep slaves, because the more the more you could do with things like that, the better it was to have hired hands do it. People who actually wanted to be there.
By the way, Shane, I was watching another Simon Whistler video about top tens American history, and there was a big epic fail when he was talking about the Confederacy, and he said that the Confederate Constitution had a policy that says slaves were never allowed to be free ever. And I looked at the Confederate Constitution, and guess what? That appears nowhere.
No, there's nothing like that in there. In fact, they had all sorts of manumission laws in the Confederacy.
In fact, if I recall correctly, they did allow slaves to be free. They did have rules that said that I think there was a policy that flat out said if a person was freed, they can't be re-enslaved. Apparently, I
Yeah,
think they had
that
something
was
like that.
actually better than it was under the Union, because under the Union,
Yeah,
if you freed a slave, then they could conceivably be captured
yeah.
and resold.
In fact, from what I've read, I mean, a lot of Southerners, were against slavery too. They just didn't feel like that it was the federal government's job to get involved.
Well, and like 12 Years a Slave, Solomon Northrop, he was in New York. He was born free, and a couple of kidnappers burned his freedom papers and then took him down south to sell him into slavery. And when they found out finally, after the 12 years, that he actually was, because I mean he had been threatened and all sorts of that things. I mean he goes into this in the book. It's a really good book if you haven't read it. But
Yeah.
by the time they actually do figure out that he was free, everyone, the people in South of Plantation owners like that, they were horrified at the thought
Oh yeah.
that
And here's
a free
another fun fact
someone who
too.
had born free had been bought and sold.
Contrary to what trade and all that, even though now slavery isn't
You're
for owning
dropping out
another
again.
person, but that doesn't mean they did action. And believe it or not, you could get punished if you were caught abusing your slave in public. Like
Yeah.
that one French lady who was discovered to be torturing and basically doing really disgusting things to her slaves. She wasn't praised and considered, oh yeah, she's defending the white man. No, she was run out of town.
Oh yeah, it was against the law in most of the southern states.
Yeah. I mean, she was tried, but of course, obviously due to her wealth, she bribed, the judge. But again, it didn't stand well. She was ran out of town, and she actually had to flee to France and spend the rest of her life there, because if she ever returned, she would have been assaulted by a mob.
And yes, there were black Southern soldiers. There were entire companies of black Southern soldiers.
Oh yeah,
And I think legally, a lot of times they weren't allowed to have certain positions in the. So what they would do is on paper they would make them like the cook or whatever, but they would really
oh
be
yeah,
filling out those.
I mean, it's pretty funny when like Simon Whistler mentioned that, when he said, yeah, but there couldn't have been black slaves because many of the southern militias had rules banning slaves. And to which I say, well, yeah, in World War II, the majority of nations had strict rules saying no one underage was allowed to fight, but that didn't stop 14 and 15-year-olds from going to the British Army and saying, well, how old are you? Oh, I'm 18. And the army, desperate for more troops, was like, okay, we'll let you go.
Yeah, didn't even
we'll
bother to check. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they didn't check, or if it was pretty clear that they couldn't, get away with it, they would send you to the front line, but they would just say, oh, well, he's not a soldier, he's a cadet for like an academy or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened in
a lot
World
in
War One. Yeah, that happened in all sorts of places. Yeah. Going back to what we were saying earlier, of course, Rose Wilder Lane, is a famous woman in libertarian circles, and her mother, Laura Ingalls Wilder, wrote Little House on the Prairie. That's basically what that was. If you read the book and you understand what's going on there, they were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, setting up farms. There weren't any police. There wasn't any, governmental structure there. They were just kind of setting things up on their own and solving their own problems.
By the way, Shane, they took Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House on the Prairie off of mandatory reading lists and all that, and took away her awards.
Yeah, I covered that. Yeah.
Yeah, because why? Because her dad got land stolen from American Indians. Well, from what I read, they were long gone before it, and he didn't steal it. It was just the Homestead Act. It was,
yeah.
The reason why the Indians left is because they were told to by the federal government, you have to leave this area so we can put more white people in here.
Well, and it was also that case where, you had a couple of characters, talking about the Indians as they did back then, and they're going, oh, that's offensive, that's horrible, but that's being true to the characters and how it was in history. I mean, do they really want history to be whitewashed to take out,
Yeah, I mean, that's actually why I understand, oh, I forgot that lady's name, but she was, that lady that had that Southern cooking show and all that, and she was disgraced and became a public pariah after she admitted she used the N-word in the past, and she had a somewhat understandable excuse. She's like, yeah, I'm 60 years old and I grew up in the Deep South, in the 1950s and 60s. That's how we talked back then. And I still let N words like that slip because that's just how I was raised. It's difficult to get rid of habits like that.
Yeah, but context doesn't matter. Extenuating circumstances doesn't matter. None of
Yeah,
that matters.
I mean,
None of that matters. Tom Sawyer or is it called Huckleberry Finn has the N word in it, so it's got to come off the school shelves. We have to censor it.
It's like, oh, we have to ban Tom Sawyer because the black guy's name is Nigger Joe. Even though, if you read the book, Nigger Joe is actually the smartest character of the bunch, and he's actually smarter than the majority of the white characters.
Yep. Yeah, he's actually portrayed very well, and the kids like him and everything, and so. But no, that doesn't matter. Mini True's gonna come in. We've got to change all this.
Yeah. Another one is that one infamous, Looney Tunes, episode, where they have those stereotypical, black people with big lips and all that, and they have a girl from Harlem going into the Deep South, and they sing that song and teach them. And from what I read, it actually wasn't intended to be offensive. It was actually intended to actually spread African American,
No, it was a depiction of actual African Americans, caricatures, of course, but they had all sorts of people in the LA jazz culture, and I think it was Bob Clampett who said, okay, we have to raise awareness about the amazing music and everything these people are doing, and basically they pretty much wrote and voiced the cartoons on their own. They just kind of animated to it,
And they did, use, exaggerated stereotypes. But here's the thing: a lot of cartoons back in those days did.
Look at how they did all sorts of cartoons where Bugs Bunny would be at this dinner with all of these other celebrities, and they'd have these crazy caricatures of them.
Yeah, a perfectly good example is Yosemite Sam. He was an exaggerated caricature of how a lot of, deep Southern Neo-Confederates were portrayed back in those days. Lots of hair, toxin, yawls, and all that.
But I mean, actual actors like, I think Cary Grant, Peter Lorre, all sorts of ones, Bing Crosby, they do all these crazy caricatures of them. That was what they did, because if you don't, you're in Uncanny Valley. I mean, it's just going to be creepy and weird, and then they'd really think it was racist.
Oh yeah, it's
because the way Uncanny Valley, it's this thing in art where you can make you start over like on one end with a stick figure, and then you make it more and more human-like, where it's a caricature, and then over on the other end is an actual full photorealistic person. And Uncanny Valley refers to kind of this graph you imagine where people sort of accept stick figures, and then they're more accepting of caricatures and things like that. And then when you get to that part where it's almost photorealistic, but not quite, it dips way down. Because the closer you get to that, the less forgiving the human brain is of all the little details that just aren't right. So, that's why if you have, movies like The Incredibles, which have human characters, they're still exaggerated. They got, big heads or long arms or whatever. Got to keep it out of Uncanny Valley.
Well, yeah, and to be honest, it's actually been shown that if you try to make something artificial, but you try to make it as realistic as possible, it actually a lot of people actually will make it come out more as creepy,
Yeah.
That's why the live action Dr. Seuss movies failed, and Nostalgia Critic, back when he was actually good and didn't become the crazy person he is today, when he was reviewing the Cat in the Hat live action movie, people are like, well, why did people find, thing 1 and thing 2 scary? We made them the way they looked in the book. And it's like, yeah, but it's the fact that they don't have lips. Well, they didn't have lips in the book. Well, yeah, because they were cartoons, they were cartoons.
Well, and also they weren't animated, when they did the Dilbert cartoon, because in the comic, Dilbert doesn't have any lips. When they made the Dilbert cartoon, they had to figure out how to give Dilbert lips that moved with it and everything. And so if you have that where it's kind of sort of photorealistic and they're moving around and everything, then you have to ask those questions.
Well, yeah, when they start moving, you have to give them lips, because if you're just drawing a still drawing, then there's no need to put lips in. And if anything, it actually can make the character look worse, because Because according to a lot of people that draw, putting lips on a character, especially exaggerated ones, makes it look like they have wrinkles. But if you animate them and make them move and they don't have lips, they look scary.
Yeah.
Similar things happens with eyebrows. If you're making a character, that doesn't have eyebrows, I mean, you can kind of get away with it, in a static image because you can just replace it with the eyes. But when you actually get into actual animation and they don't have, eyebrows, then they come out as creepy because you can't read their face properly.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, like in Finding Nemo, when they personified the fish, that's what they did. They gave them, human eyes that could focus in front, and then they gave them this kind of like eyebrow thing type, not literal eyebrows, but this kind of little way they could morph their head that's kind of like eyebrows, so that they could have those expressions. Because if you actually tried to animate a photorealistic fish like that, it would just be weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I will give Disney credit where credit is due when it comes to that department. They are very good on, details about how their cartoons look like. I've actually read that the design of Mickey Mouse, like his real life, the costume, it's actually designed so that it always looks like he's happy and uplifting to look at him.
Yep. They want everyone to be happy. And if you're, I think it's probably easier if you're in, a Mickey Mouse costume because you don't have to keep the face going. But if you're like Cinderella or something, you have to keep the smile going, and you can't even drop it for a second, or they'll fire your rear end.
Yeah, I've heard being a performer is really bad, and not to mention, from what I've read, they have a very, very, very strict do not break character.
Oh yeah. Well, it's not even just do not break character. It's not even do not break character. It's don't even stop appearing happy, for a second.
Oh yeah, and apparently it all happened because when Disneyland first opened, Walt Disney was in Tomorrowland, and he saw an actor on his break, and he was in a cowboy costume and all that, and apparently Walt threw a massive temper tantrum about it. Yeah. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm all for not ruining the illusion, but some of those rules they have, it's just like, wow.
Well, I mean,
is that necessary?
They want everything to be perfect, and they want you to know that when you go to Disney, you can bring the kids there knowing it's a happy place full of happy people.
Yep.
Speaking of happy place, how's Squirrel coming along?
I mean, it's coming along. I was thinking about maybe one of these weeks doing a live demo where I have a fresh computer set up, like in a VM or something, and just go through the installation and just show you the steps of installing. But yeah,
that'd be good.
But yeah, there's all sorts of stuff going on. There's the you really need at this point a lot more of the server side solutions before you really go out and start hitting it hot and heavy. Because if you go somewhere and like, you should have Squirrel, they're like, okay, well, do you have a Ruby version of the Squirrel? No. Well, that's not going to work very well, is it? So, but I mean, there's all sorts of people working on that.
Crazy people.
I mean, it's going to take time to happen. I mean, this is a marathon, but
yeah. Going back to what I was saying about Disneyland, when I heard about their don't break character policy, I almost imagined Disneyland in that one South Park episode where they're at the historical village. I can imagine like terrorists taking over Disneyland, and they demand to know where the hidden vault where all of Disney's bail bonds are, and the guy in Mickey Mouse like, oh, why, I don't know what you're talking about. Where's the money? Oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
I remember that.
And it's like, here's the thing. You don't tell us, we're going to kill one of the kids. Well, I still don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
jQuery, oh boy.
Actually, from what I've heard, Disney's strict no breaking character policy actually got them in trouble a couple of times, because there were cases where guests, got seriously injured, and because they had a strict rule of you can't, ruin the happiness, they had to act as, quote unquote calmly as possible, and basically they just hid the person away and left him there to lie in his own blood, and they didn't call and they waited to escort him out of the building for paramedics, and by that time he died.
Oh.
They also got them in trouble when they tried to open up in France because they had all these strict, laws, and the French people came up with. You do realize that that's against French.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't, if you told a French person you have to look a certain way, they're gonna say them because
You're dropping out again.
oh
Yeah, the
I was just
bloat,
saying,
the bloat. I keep finding more and more. I keep finding myself missing the web of the 90s because, yeah, you couldn't do as much. And it's nice to be able to do video and live streaming and stuff like that, and all that's good. But if you just look at like a normal website where it has text and some elements you can interact with, maybe a drop down or stuff like that. Even back in the 90s with slower computers and slower internet and everything, it was a lot more responsive. Because now everything is, built in, jQuery and Node.js and everything. We've got to, load, I mean, God, you total this up and it's like megabytes worth of scripts to do all the, it's crazy.
Yeah, not to mention the internet was a lot more carefree back then, and you could, and I remember when you literally could watch entire movies and TV shows on YouTube, but then the guys came out and said, "Oh, you can't air that obscure cartoon from the 1980s."
I'm talking earlier than that. I'm talking like 98 or something.
Oh.
way back early on.
Well,
Man,
then,
the web was so responsive back then. And I mean, it would be, it's just like, well, it's like I've said this about other stuff. They're just kind of assuming, well, people have got a lot more powerful computers now. Yeah, but it's still bloated.
Yeah.
If I go to click on a drop down, it should pop up immediately. I shouldn't have to wait on it. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And what's even worse, Shane? I remember that one time when you were talking about, why we need to have stronger encryption and better that. And there was that one IT guy, that was crying saying, yeah, but that requires a lot of work and effort and all that. And it's like, oh, so you're an IT trained guy and you think it's too much work. So it's like, oh, let's just handle an average Joe that knows little to nothing about computer engineering and coding to deal with it.
Yeah, let's leave them with insecure defaults because you don't want to do your job.
Yeah,
it's not even because this was, I think you were talking about when I was talking about DNS over HTTPS. And they're like, well, how are we supposed to do that? And Mozilla just has a page that says, okay, here's what you need to do. And it's not even that difficult. It's not even that long a page. It would take you like, 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course, the government's not helping. Of course, the government's not helping because if you make like a legitimately strong, secure, hardware, they're gonna be, oh, but then how are we supposed to open it up if we suspect you might be a criminal?
Reason why apps like Discord and Steam are slow. I don't know about Steam, but Discord, you're basically running a website inside Chrome when you run the Discord app. That's what it is. It's Chrome.
Yeah, I will say that's the problem I've been having with BitTube is I have it on Chrome, but for some reason, it just does not want to open up on my Firefox. So
it's a lot slower on Firefox, and there is actually a desktop type thing, which is like the Discord app, the BitTubers app. It just pulls up in Chrome, but it's its own little thing, and it runs better there. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of slow in Firefox.
Though I will say, even though I prefer Firefox over Chrome, BitTube does make it. Airtime does make browsing Google a little bit, Google Chrome a little bit more easier because a lot of websites on the Google. I notice they tend to get more ads than normal. So
yeah, I mean it is amazing how much more efficient you can make it just by getting rid of the ads.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, not only does getting rid of the ads, not only does it make it more because you're not being interrupted in the middle of your program for an ad, I found it also makes the video run smoother because there's less garbage, in the background code.
And I said this back when it started, and I'm still saying it now. It would be really nice if while the ad was loaded, you could go ahead and queue up the first part of the video. So we could just go right into the video when the ad's over. They still won't do that. I don't know.
I know. I think you've ranted about this one time, but another thing that really grinds my gears is when I'm reading like a news site or a Wikia page, and I'm just reading it, and suddenly out of the blue I hear, "Hey, did you hear about that new pill that everyone's been talking about?" I'm like, whoa, what happened?
Oh, the autoplays. That's, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's even big website like USA Today, Fox News. They're doing stuff like that. You let them be like, okay, I'm gonna scroll down, and you're right in the middle of reading it, and then the video finally loads. And here we are with our latest news, and it's like, oh my god, stop, scroll back up, pause it, jeez.
Yeah, I've noticed that ever since I was a kid, that ads are always louder than the actual thing you're watching.
Yeah. Well,
you know, it's like
cause, I mean, people complained about that back in television because, you know, the show would go off for the ad break and then the ads would come and they'd be louder. But I mean, what it would be is they would have more dynamic range compression on it to make it appear louder. But if you're actually watching the VU meter, it's the same volume level. But does Chrome disable them by default? I know Firefox does that. I haven't seen anything. Chrome was supposed to do that, but I don't think Firefox does a much better job about not playing them automatically.
I've actually heard that the guy that invented the pop-up ad and the autoplay ad, I've actually heard he regrets inventing them.
Oh yeah, he did this whole thing where he said, "I'm sorry, it's my fault. I apologize."
Yeah, you know, I mean, and they asked him, well, if you didn't like doing it, then why'd you do it? And he flat out just said, look, the only reason I did it was because a bunch of advertising companies gave me a shit ton of money to do it, and I was a broke programmer at the time.
Well, and he didn't really have a concept of what it was going to lead to.
Yeah, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's actually a lot of things out there. I've actually read a list of historical bad things that a lot of inventors regret doing. And here's another good one. McAfee of McAfee Software, he regrets, you know, developing McAfee because McAfee, the software isn't as good as it used to be, but the problem is that it's next to impossible to uninstall.
Yeah. Well, and he tried getting his name off of it. And I think Peter Norton did this too with like the Norton stuff, and the courts just said no, it's their name now.
Yeah. Speaking of McAfee, a lot of people are using him as an example of why libertarianism is bad, and it's like, well, you know, I have heard the controversy about him, you know, usually involved with murder. Now, the drug trafficking, the allegedly that he killed people, that's hearsay.
Yeah, I mean, there's no evidence for it, and I mean, it's just completely over the top and ridiculous. So.
Well,
do you still play or produce music at all, Shane? Not like I used to, but I still just try to practice whenever I get some time together, which I really don't. But.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying McAfee didn't do it, but there's no proof, and it's innocent until proven guilty. So I'm sorry, Pete.
Well, and
that's why I hate the whole Me
Too. Who do you trust more, John McAfee or the government of Belize? You know, who has a bigger track record for lying and making up crap and being corrupt and evil and everything? You know?
And that's another thing, too. The stories I hear about that, they're always talking about, yeah, McAfee did this and that. I'm like, well, if it did happen, then he didn't do it. The Belize did it, you know. You know, and they only did it because, you know, I guess he was giving them a lot of tax money and they were doing that. So even if he did do it, that's not, capitalism's fault. That's a corrupt government's fault.
Yeah.
Do you guys vote?
Yeah, but when there's something worth voting for.
Yeah.
There's going to be a medical marijuana on our ballot next year, so definitely gonna vote for that.
Yeah. Hopefully something like that will happen in North Carolina, because they've done polls and like 80% of North Carolinians are in favor of medical marijuana. But what happens is they keep trying to get a bill together in the state legislature, and they do this crap all the time. The party leaders, you know, because they're the speakers and everyone, the ones who go through the agenda. And so, like, maybe medical marijuana will be the third on the list, and so they'll do the first one and say, okay, what we're doing is this. And then they'll move down to the second one. Okay, now we're doing this. And then they'll just skip to the fourth. Okay, the next item is they'll just skip right over and they won't even consider it, because the party apparatchik doesn't want it.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. Last time I voted for Donald Trump, but it wasn't because I legitimately supported him. It was more out of cynicism.
Yeah.
Basically, I was like that old lady from Atlantis the Lost Empire. I just went up there to the bowl and I was just like, we're all gonna die. And I just voted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to Donald Trump's defense, at least he wasn't advocating for a war between the United States and Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Clinton, she
Or the United
seriously.
States and Iran, or the United States and Syria, or the United States and all the other. Hillary wanted war with everybody, I think.
Yeah, she wanted to enforce a no-fly zone over Syria, which the General Chiefs of Staff told her, Miss Clinton, that would interfere with Russia, and they'll take that as a military action. And she's like, well, then we'll stop them too. And I'm like, you're seriously saying we should, exchange with Russia, because that's not going to end well no matter who wins.
I mean, it's surreal crazy, because you had that where, supposedly Turkey had bombed the Kurds and stuff like that, and I don't know how much truth there was to that, because there's been a lot of misinformation about that kind of thing before, but it was like, Trump was so horrible and evil for not immediately going in and, bombing Turkey, and this was on The View. They were like, how dare he not support our allies, the Kurds, apparently not realizing that Turkey's our ally as well, so what are we supposed to do? But I mean, this was The View, and they were pulling out George W. Bush rhetoric.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And of course, they were completely quiet when Obama was doing all of it. I mean, even Clinton. Hell, they were quiet when Clinton was doing it, from what I read.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when
Clinton did a lot of it.
Yeah, when Bill Clinton dropped a bomb that blew up a medicine factory because they were given false information that it was producing arms, barely anyone batted an eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that's actually one thing that just made me, cringe when I saw, Bowling for Columbine and Michael Moore was showing all these atrocities the United States committed, and I'm like, well, yeah, those are sad, but what the fuck does this have to do with gun control?
Yeah.
Yeah, what the fuck does overthrowing a president in another country during the Cold War, what does this have to do with gun restrictions? That's a government control subject, not a gun control subject.
Yep.
Not to mention, one thing that made me kind of laugh was he mentioned, the coup against President Diem of South Vietnam, and well, again, while it wasn't a smart move, it wasn't a smart move for the U.S. to remove Diem. President Diem was not a nice guy himself, Michael Moore. In fact, he's partially the reason why Vietnam became the way it was because he was going around killing and throwing people in prison. And even though there were non-communist, groups within South Vietnam that are saying, hey, Diem's crazy, we got to do something about it, the U.S. government's like, oh no, Diem's a U.S. ally. We have to support him no matter what. And well, by the time he got rid of it, Diem killed all the moderates. So there was no one, moderate who wasn't a communist that could take over. So the military of South Vietnam took over, and nobody liked them. And that's what happens,
Yeah, gun control is a misnomer, Manica built. It's monopolization. No one wants to control the guns of the state. Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not about getting rid of guns. It's about only the state gets to have guns. Only our mafia gang gets to have guns.
Yeah, Shane.
And the criminals too.
Well, and the criminals go. Well, what's the difference, really?
You know what is the stupidest, anti-gun quote I've ever heard? It was by Ozzy Osbourne. He was saying, "Oh, well, if guns don't kill people, then why do we send soldiers out with guns?"
It's the soldiers that do the killing, not the guns. The gun is a tool.
Yeah. I actually did a parody of that where I posted that quote, and I said, here's an ancient tapestry of the Battle of Hastings back in 1066. Hey, where are the guns? I mean, I'm seeing people killing each other, but where's the guns?
Yep.
Like, I'm sorry, people, but if you were to take a magic fairy wand and make every single gun disappear, and you were to completely make it impossible for guns to be manufactured, all that would happen is the state would go back to using swords, spears, and catapults.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that would happen.
In fact, it was a lot easier for them to subjugate a population back then for that reason.
Oh, yeah. I actually think I saw a joke like that one time, like someone was doing a joke one time about a magic genie, and like a very anti-gun woman, comes across a genie, and she wishes for a world without gun, and he sends her back to the 11th century where she's about to be burned.
You're dropping out again.
Oh, I parody where an anti-gun woman finds a magic genie in a bottle. She world without guns, and he sends her back to the 11th century where she's about to be witch.
Yeah, you completely dropped out. I didn't get all of that. Something
Oh,
about
I can
guns
hear
and
him
being
fine.
something about guns and being sent back to the 11th century.
Yeah, a woman tells a genie she wishes for a world without guns, and he sends her back to the 11th century.
Yeah, it was something like, what was it, in 1300? And I forget what the statistic was, but the murder rate in London per 100,000 was like in the hundreds or something like that. It was this crazy high murder rate. No guns.
Yeah.
No guns.
In fact, actually, it's no coincidence, that the Enlightenment and Reformation period occurred when guns became a practical weapon that was easy to mass produce and manufacture, and that's because it essentially turned, the army of heavily armored mercenary knights and made them worthless, because even the most powerful knight charge won't survive a volley from some arquebuses. So the politicians had. Yeah, Vega.
Yeah, if we could just ban the knives, then we'll have the utopia.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then people are just gonna beat each other up, and then that's impossible. You might as well, say, well, it's against the law to have hands now, but then people are just gonna kill each other with their arm stubs.
Just a scratch.
Yeah, I'm sorry, status, but if a person is that determined to kill someone, they're gonna do it. That's why you can't legislate it away. All you can do is allow people to properly protect themselves. Reminds me of some of those people that like to say, "Oh, so you're saying we should legalize murder?" Well, no, but let me ask you this: even if we did legalize murder, do you think people are going to go around and kill each other? Do you think if a guy comes up and says, "I'm going to rip your effing throat open," do you think a person's going to say, "Oh, well, it's not against the law. I might as well let him do it"? No. No, they're gonna pull out their gun or something and say, "You get the hell away from me, or I'm gonna kill you." Most people are good, and even the bad people, are still not gonna get away with it. That's why the Purge movies make no sense, because we've actually seen this happen in real life. Contrary to popular belief, if the government collapses and there's no laws, people don't suddenly say, "Wait, there's no laws? Yeah, let's go out and rape and murder a bunch of people." People don't do that.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I was having to take care of Troll in the chat.
I'm honestly trying to remember the first time I was taught that anarchy just meant chaos, but I can't put my finger on it. Maybe it was public school. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but you did start roboting when I went back there and did that, so I think it has to do with how YouTube is trying to do their live thing, and it's trying to interfere. I don't know, but. Yeah, but also, it's cleared up now that I'm out of that and I'm back. So,
actually, Shane, I saw a long list of which explains why the purge actually wouldn't work in real life. And one thing that often gets ignored is not just how it would affect all that. If a country allows once a year, every now and then for people to do whatever they want, and it results in mass murder and all that, that would actually damage the United States' foreign relationships. The United States would become a pariah state. No one would want to trade with them. And as anyone knows, if no one wants to trade with you, I don't care what kind of natural resources you have, you're going to starve.
Yep.
Yeah. That's actually partially what happened to Nazi Germany when they became aggressive. A bunch of nations that were neutral said, look, Germany, we won't go to war with you, but we're not going to fund the Nazis anymore, so we're not going to trade. And the Nazis, said, holy crap, we're losing all this steel and grain because nobody wants to trade with us. So, well, we got to attack Russia and get as much resources as we can, but that doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm trying to, because you were roboting again. I went back and closed out of the live thing. So, yeah, I think that's what it is. It was because it was as soon as I went back there to take care of the troll. But
here's another thing, Shane, and this is the paradox of the trope of crime is legal trope. If they say, well, you can't interfere with the purge because all crime is legal. Yeah, but to interfere with the purge would be considered a crime, but since all crime is legal, it's impossible to enforce, the whole no interfering with the purge.
Yeah, it's a contradiction.
Yeah, it would be impossible.
If you can do whatever you want, then that would include interfering with the purge.
Yeah. That's another thing too. It's like everyone is just all like everyone who is purging is all like oh yeah, this is the greatest thing ever. Yet there's no like militias on there. There's no one patrolling the streets. Basically saying anyone that's purging here will be shot on sight. No questions asked. We'd actually be seeing a lot more of that. People would probably resist it. And seriously, it helps out because people buy all the security technique and all the destruction it causes. Will bring jobs. Broken window fallacy.
Yep. It's
You
amazing.
want to know the other hilarious thing about the Purge?
Oh, what's that, SO?
Well, that even in the movies, in the this timeline of the Purge, the canon of the movies, originally when the government started the Purge, because the Purge is a government program in those movies, no one was actually going out and killing people. So the government had to hire a bunch of mercenaries to start killing people on the Purge in order for the Purge to become what it is in the movies.
Well, why would they need the purge to do that? They do that all the time.
Yeah, I know it's stupid, but it's yeah.
Yeah,
I'd
the
like
idea
to
is
point
people,
that out because
the idea is people weren't purging. So that was I didn't see the movies. That was actually part of the movies.
yeah, that's actually the canon of that series because it's like a series of movies. Another like sorry to butt in so abruptly, but another thing that
No.
I'd
That's what
mentioned
happens
in
on these
chat,
live streams. That's nothing new here.
But I wanted to get your take on what do you think about like you've made a quickie about the sort of historical negationism we're seeing now, um, which frame Jim Crow laws as a product of the market or some sort of financial policy rather than a product of systemic state intervention and finance manipulation. But what I wanted to ask you about is have you seen these recent history books being put in these government curriculums which refer to Herbert Hoover's economic policy as voluntarism?
I haven't seen that. I mean, they've always been saying it was free market, but I haven't seen them actually calling it voluntarism.
Or yeah, Heartless Soy Boy is somebody who's in my server. He left because the little hoppy and spat that's going on between my server and a couple others right now. But um he was posting screenshots of stuff from his history book in high because I think he's in I don't know what grade he's in, but he's still at high school. And yeah, the history book explicitly refers to Herbert Hoover, his approach to the economy as voluntarism.
That's crazy.
So that's a new brand of
and
that's a new brand of history.
And as for Jim Crow, the clue is they're called Jim Crow laws. That's a hint.
Yeah.
Yeah, just what I wanted to bring up is the historical negationism going on in the government sort of narratives that they're pushing in the media and in the education system. Clearly, I think they've recognized anarchism as a threat, and it's starting to get ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is what I was saying. It's like, oh well, we need to stop using the word capitalism. We need to stop using the word libertarianism because they're poisoning all these terms, and so we need to go over to voluntarist because. And I'm like, they're just gonna do the same thing. Well, okay, who was right? They've already started.
I'm not. My position's not we should stop using these terms. My position is we should we should define these terms because that's a big part of the problem, and that's a big part of why the state and infiltrate have been able to do this so effectively is because libertarians, as much as these political movements based on libertarianism, and libertarians seem to be very comfortable, uncomfortable, I mean, with acknowledging this fact. But in order to have a defined political affiliation, you have to actually set a and stick by a set of first principles, and that means not necessarily disassociating from, but setting yourself apart from people who have positions that don't subscribe to those first principles. So I
Yeah,
Right.
but I
think that
mean,
what I think what
you also get like the whole communist thing of, well, we had the word libertarian first, even though they didn't, and we keep showing that over and over again. But it's just,
Oh yeah.
anarchy goes back to Greece like 2600 years ago. And on top of that, as you've pointed out, in the modern political context, the earliest point that you can derive from libertarianism being used would be during the late 18th and early 19th century, where it referred to a a position which defined free will and explained that because free will existed, everyone is naturally entitled to the product of their actions, um, such as speech, property, freedom of association, etc. And if you understand that, then it's pretty easy to get rid of all the revisionism, and it's pretty easy to point out all of these groups which really don't have any continuity with libertarianism, but are trying to present themselves as if they do, such as minarchists or these Marxists claiming that Marxism is libertarian because Marx said he wanted a stateless society.
yeah. Zerdav asks, and Kapistan, would things like workers' unions and workplace democracy be allowed? Sure, as long as it's voluntary, but you can't force anyone to join. You can't say,
Yeah, I mean
hey,
that's
because what's
that's the
happening now, what we're complaining about here is these monopoly unions where, oh, if you want to do this job in this state, you must join this union and pay them dues whether you want to or not. That's
yeah,
what we object to.
that's the irony is that you can be a communist in Ancapistan. We're not against the communism. What we're against is the Communist Party coming in, rounding up everyone with guns, taking over. And if you don't want to be a communist, well, it's off to Siberia for you, comrade. That's what we're against.
A
The thing
communist can
is,
have the commune inside a libertarian society. A libertarian cannot have a libertarian enclave inside a communist society. Yeah.
the funny thing is about labor unions themselves is that during the 19th century, where there actually was a continuity between the individualist libertarians and the labor movement, with by like the mid 19th century, what no one ever really seems to question is why that was, and that's because if you look at the unions of the time, they almost don't even really resemble the unions of today. Instead, as of right now, they're basically just labor market cartels established by the state. But back then, they were very counter-economic in nature. They essentially served as a fund which allowed certain individual laborers to mitigate costs created by state intervention into the market, and sort of set back the disparities created by that. By which I mean, state intervention often created artificial scarcity, and that would, as you know, and one of the adverse effects that had on the labor market is it, for one, it allowed a lot of these firms to scale up more so than they would naturally be able to in a freed market. And consequently, the marginal effects of discrimination and actually evaluating each laborer's efficiency it became skewed internally. So what labor unions used to do essentially is operate as, they would give the companies money, or they would point out the efficiency of each worker and would essentially give them a platform to bargain. So actually, they were originally designed to mitigate one of the costs created by state intervention into the market. But then, of course, they got appropriated by the states and started perpetuating the same problem.
And also, I was about to say, people always talk about, it's like, oh, how come I'm only making $50,000 a year, yet Bill Gates is making hundreds of quadrillions of dollars, a second. Well, if he's getting that money by providing you goods and services that you want to buy, making our lives easier, why does it matter?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Let me say what I said a minute ago. If he said I favor of reducing the wealth disparity, which over enriches a very small few while billions others suffer, then you want a free market, because that's what does it and socialism doesn't. And he also says you seem okay with socialists as long as they advocate for voluntary methods. Well, they advocate for voluntary methods. They're actually anarcho-capitalists, not socialists.
Yeah, that's the paradox of a lot of those, socialists and communists that claim, oh no, we're anarchists too. Okay, let's say someone, in your commune doesn't want to play by the rules. He wants to run his farm his own way. Now, he's not forcing anyone to run it his own way. He's just gonna do what he wants to do. What are you gonna do about it? If you let him do what he wants to do, you're no longer a communist. And if you send, the Communist Party after him to throw him in a gulag, well, congratulations, you invented a state.
Yep.
That's actually
communism is about people doing things a certain way, and what are you going to do with the people who don't do things that certain way? If you let them do something else, then you're an anarcho-capitalist.
I bring this up to people that love to use, the Spanish Civil War as an example of how anarcho-socialism would work, and I'm like, they failed for that exact reason, because the Spanish communes that were set up, they were turning on each other because they were running out of everything, and they were going around killing and imprisoning anyone who wasn't following their way. So
the thing is, calling that a stateless society is almost a joke, because if you look at the sort of political structure, there was a very clear political ruling class that existed. It was the people. It was the CIO union that was enforcing these worker federations, because that's the thing that is never really asked about collective ownership, or the concept of collective ownership, and the idea, and these sort of federated settlements, is who is actually forcing these people to associate in this manner, and who, obviously the idea of collective ownership is incoherent. Simply, if you were to analyze the fact that people um, can't do whatever they want with the property, there's a point where they can't exercise dominion over the property, or they're going to run into conflict with what someone else wants to do with the property. So it's not their property. Someone owns it and is letting them use it. So the question is, who owns it?
What exactly does Elon Musk do that merits billions of dollars? Ask the people who gave it to him, because except for whatever he might have gotten from the government in subsidies, which were against, of course, every single one of those dollars was given to him voluntarily by someone who thought he was making their life better in some way.
Kings and presidents got their money and power because centuries ago their nation won a war. The king got in power not because people liked him. He got in power because his dad, because his mom and dad were the great 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 grandchildren of some low life warlord who a long time ago won a war and said, "Yep, I won a war. That clearly means God chose me to rule this land. Now do what I say, or I'll kill you."
By the way, I
And
think
by
this
the
is the
way,
first
Shane,
time. This is the first time I've actually had to moderate anyone in the chat. Not Zur, he's fine, but Zerdav, he's fine. But there were two others that I had to give timeouts to. So I don't
Yeah,
know what
also-
that means. I don't know if that means I'm growing or if it means that I don't know what it means.
Also, Shane, going back to the little kings thing in monarchists, probably the silliest thing I've heard is monarchists say, "Well, monarchies are much more stable economic-wise because monarchs have an incentive to take care of their country for their next generation." And I'm like, did you not pay attention to France prior to the revolution? They
Mhm.
were completely bankrupt, and the king was still spending money on lavish parties.
Yep.
Yeah.
thing that I was gonna ask you, Shane, because of what you just mentioned about Elon Musk, is what do you think about the the approach to Austro-libertarianism taken by people like Charles Johnson, Roderick Long, or Gary Chartier, who would argue that the modern business structure is actually more of a product of state privilege itself, and therefore they're skeptical of arguments like that.
Well, I mean, it might be, but I mean, the thing is, I that's really, I'm not really sure what the point is in that kind of speculation, because if we turn this into an anarcho-capitalist society, then those businesses are either going to survive, change how they do things, or go out of business. And if they can't survive in that structure, they can't survive in that structure. They'll figure out something else, or they'll go out of business. So I don't really know what the point of it is.
I think a perfectly good example of this is, I think a perfectly good example about how, this whole thing about government and big business being together is look at the Walt Disney Corporation. The only reason they're still in business is because of the strict copyright laws, so nobody can use the stuff they own. There's, in my honest opinion, there's no doubt in my mind that if you were to magically find every single copy of the copyright that Disney owns, and you were to destroy them all, wipe them completely off of existence, and prevent the government from reinstalling them, Disney would be out of business within a year.
Yep.
Well, the thing is, I think people like Roderick Long honestly have a pretty compelling case for what they're trying to argue. Because for one thing, we can tangibly point to specific laws that are designed to that are essentially designed to make it more costly to give out loans, or to create a greater risk associated to giving out loans to certain models of firm, which either engage in markets, or engage in markets in a way which the state doesn't like. And on top of that, there are countless state secured privileges that even you regularly point to, which allow businesses to externalize costs they would otherwise have to take into internally managing their resources, such as copyright protection or subsidies.
Yeah. So Zur apparently had to go, but thanks Zur for the talking points. That was great, and thanks also for the donation. So hopefully we'll see him in future ones.
Yeah, the point isn't that like the businessmen are necessarily aggressors. It's that the state manufactures manufactures the political economy that we have, and therefore it's kind of difficult to say that everything that we have in, like, the condition of the market that we have is a product of free association. It's certainly not an approximation of a free market.
I'm sorry, one of the trolls came back, and I missed what you had said.
Oh, well, what I had said is that because we can point to all these state privileges and the state intervention into the market, it's kind of difficult to say that sort associations with firms in the current market is actually a product of free association. We can certainly say that the current market, the political economy, isn't a approximation of a free market.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't
Yeah.
be a stretch to
Well,
say something like that.
yeah, I mean, we don't know, because the current market does restrict, the businesses people can do. We don't know what alternatives there would have been to, Amazon or, whatever business,
Oh yeah.
there was, it would have
Oh.
been there. So yeah, it might not strictly
Yeah.
be true that in an absolute ideal scenario, Jeff Bezos or whoever, earned all of that money, but at least in the situation that we're in, like I said, aside from any dollars, they got from the government or, where they like take land in eminent domain to give to them. I mean, aside from stuff like that, all of the money that people give them, they give it to them because they feel they get a benefit in return, and they feel that they're better off ordering products from Amazon than from Walmart.com or by going to Walmart or whatever.
Sure.
But I mean, you could argue that there would be a lot of, I'm sure there would be a lot of other options, and so maybe Amazon wouldn't have made all that money,
Well,
in an anarcho-capitalist, but who knows?
Well,
I
you know, I
mean,
think
we can say for certain there are various things we can point to. We don't know what a free market would be like without a state. But we do know for certain that this couldn't have happened in a free market,
yeah,
and the
but
reason we can say that is because of diseconomy of scale.
yeah,
Yeah.
and sorry, status, but we never had a legit, anarcho-capitalist society. That's not a reason why we shouldn't do it, because I like how you pointed that out, Shane. You could, because by that logic, you could do that with anything. Like, if you were to go back during, during the medieval times where people were very religious, and you told them how in our timeline, the church has lost most of its political power, and now we're all secular. So they'd be like, oh, but how can your society function without God or a church?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Which again, that's why it really pisses me off when I see a lot of those atheists, still worship the state like it's some magical deity. It's like, how can you not see that, people? How can you not see that?
But I'm just like, let's just have freedom, and let's have all of the aggression out of our lives, and then whatever kind of businesses people are capable of creating and sustaining in that environment, okay.
Mm.
And I mean, yeah, you wouldn't be able to have like some corporation just take over everything because all these states are giving them free land that they took from people from eminent domain, and giving them all these special deals and everything.
It's so funny how single-minded people think about that. You always ask them, well, how would a corporation take over without a state? It's like, well, they would just buy everything. And I'm like, do you not understand the logistics behind that? This isn't like a game of Monopoly where you can just go around buying everything. Sorry, people, but Monopoly is not proof of something that is real. It's a game.
Well, it's like when people say, okay, well, if I'm a monopoly, I'm just going to buy up everything. It's like, well, okay, I've created a business competing with yours. What are you going to do? It's like, well, I'm going to buy your business. It's like, but I'm not going to sell it to you. How are you going to buy it if I'm not going to sell it to you?
Yeah,
they don't seem to understand that. They don't seem to get that they can only buy things that other people are selling.
Yeah, it reminds me.
The other thing that's pretty hilarious about that is, if you like, this is apparently something which Rockefeller originally tried. He tried to establish a sort of monopoly, but the problem that he encountered is that people would just start shell companies that specifically so they could just get money from Rockefeller. They'd spend like $10,000 or whatever the equivalent would have been at the time, just like an empty garage, and then Rockefeller $1 million.
All he was doing was creating a market for oil startups. Hey, if we start up this business, Rockefeller come and buy us out for millions of dollars.
Well, and here's another thing too, Walls. Not even just that. It's like, let's say, because we actually see this a lot, today, with, let's say someone buys, another company, the workers
You're dropping out
stuff. Well,
again,
what are they going to do? They're going to leave. Yeah, they'll leave.
Chris, you're dropping out again.
Even assuming,
I was saying. Let me repeat what I said to Shayna. I was just saying another thing also that can happen, because we do see this, is if a rival buys, another company, well, let's say the people working in that company don't like, the new management, they'll quit and go to another competitor or form their own company. And we have seen that happen. We've seen cases, where companies buy out another company and the people of that company just quit en masse. And now, not only did the previous, buyer have to, read that, they have to restock everything, or they have to split up their workforce, and now they're not as efficient anymore.
Well, I think that's fundamentally, it's not even that complicated. The reason that a scenario like that can't happen, the idea of a monopoly happening in a free market where one company obtains 90 to 95 or even 100% of the market share for a particular industry, are the effects of diseconomy of scale. If a firm were to scale up to that size, they could easily be subverted by competition.
Actually,
and in fact, just scaling up to be that size in the first place, it creates a certainty that they will be inefficient. For one thing, they won't be able to properly allocate their resources anymore, because they'll have so many resources that management will begin internally giving contradictory orders and resulting in resource, and that'll result in inefficiency. But also, hierarchical firms like this are not actually capable of communicating information at all, because information can't be communicated um, between the people managing the firms and the actual people on the floor, taking the orders and managing the products, because there are so many people actually managing the product that the managers will end up essentially having to omit a lot of the information taken into account on the actual, the floor of the business.
okay.
So
Many clips. It's saying something about being about how monarchy would be better over democracy if we had to have a state. If we have to have a government, the ideal government, if we had to have one, should be a limited republic.
I'd say that's a nonsensical
he's quoting
argument.
Hoppe. He's quoting
I
Hoppe.
know that, but still, I don't think a monarchy is just as bad as a democracy. And to be
I don't know. With the monarchy, you do have fewer targets when the revolution comes.
Yeah,
I'd say also that's a nonsensical argument to try and compare one state to another, and say that from that comparison, one state is more ethical or less criminal than another. Because the problem with that is the problem with that is that it's dependent on the existence of more than one state. It's not an individual analysis of a state. It's a comparison of one state to another. And
it's a bit like
you can't do that with crimes, because crimes occur on an individualistic basis between one victim and a criminal.
Okay, it's a bit like, do you want to be extorted by a mob with a godfather or a syndicate? That's basically what it's saying.
Yeah.
And he's saying the Godfather is better than the Syndicate is what he's saying.
Well, no. Yeah. What I'm saying fundamentally is that you can't do that when you're trying to evaluate the legitimacy or the nature of a state.
Also, another thing I really hate also is when some people try to talk about anarcho-capitalists and all that. They're like, yeah, but isn't a corporation a form of government or something? To which I say, there's a huge difference between people getting together, and agreeing to pool their resources and run the company the way they see fit, and a guy in a high castle, you know, winning a war and declaring, "Yep, I won the war. That means everyone has to obey what I say."
Well, and that's the
That's an
thing. You talk about
equivocation argument.
you talk about like the different alternatives that could happen with an anarchy, and they're like, well, you're just creating a government. It's like, no, you're redefining the word government. You're redefining
Exactly.
it. You're redefining it to include all sorts of stuff that we aren't against. We are against aggression. And we're
Yeah.
against governments because they commit aggression. If you have this thing over here and you call it a government, but it doesn't commit aggression, well, we don't have a problem with it, and you can call it whatever you want, I guess. But
Yeah.
if it doesn't commit aggression, we don't have a problem with it.
Yes, you know, I honestly don't understand why. I honestly believe, you know, left-wing statism should be categorized as a religion. It should be recognized as a tax-exempt religion because that's how they sure behave. That should be like an Onion article or a Babylon Bee article. Yep, Marxism is a tax-exempt, should be accepted as a tax-exempt religion.
Why just Marxists? Have you seen some of the ridiculous shit coming out of the constitutionalists and the mega populist crowd recently?
Eh.
No, I'm not sure what
We
you're
have
talking about
all
there,
this.
actually.
We have all these signals which indicate there's essentially going to be a worldwide collapse of every aspect of the political economy within the next couple years. But I'm not afraid because Blumph is president.
Okay, that's weird.
I will say, you know, I was watching a video about America and all that, and I will say this, and when it comes to statism, one thing I don't know European nations and citizens is how willing they are.
You're cutting out
And
again.
and one thing I often say to people, perfectly good example about the U.S. versus Europe is, remember in a row, nothing happened in America, and I jokingly told happened in
Yeah,
a
you're cutting
European
out like every 3 seconds, and then I'm missing like 2 seconds of it. And it's not
Really?
happening with anyone else. It's not happening with SO or Vega. It's just happening with you tonight. I don't know why.
Oh, well, I was just saying, you know, a lot of Europeans, they're so willing to let the state run their lives, and I brought this up to a lot of people, especially some European statists, and I say, I mean, just look at the United States. When the government, quote unquote, shut down twice, nothing happened. If something like that were to happen in the European Union, because we have seen it happen, guess what happens? There's riots.
I would. I don't know if I would disagree that Europe is fundamentally more statist, but I would point there are actually a lot of I'd say better libertarian currents over there in
Well,
Europe compared
well,
to
I'm
the
talking
United
about the
States.
well, I'm talking about the European Union mostly. You know, I mean, yeah,
I agree, but once look at the Balkan states particularly and like Central Europe.
yeah,
There's they have actual schools which teach people how to create subversive digital applications for the sake of crypto anarchism.
okay,
There's one such school in Prague. I think you can look up stories about it. So
yeah.
uh, I would say fundamentally that a lot more of the population over there is statist, but their libertarians comparatively are much better and are much more effective at
Yeah,
doing what they do.
I will say this also, and granted, this is going to kind of spoil it because this was my Patreon question that I was going to ask you, but I've actually talked to some Russian nationalists, and they're all like, "Well, you know what? We tried free market capitalism in Russia in the '90s, and the shock of it caused a massive, you know, societal collapse." And I'm like, "Really? We didn't see that. We didn't see that in the Balkans. We didn't see Estonia destroy itself. You know, when all the millionaires came in, we didn't see Poland. Fight a massive civil war."
We
You know
did
what's
on the other hand see massive problems in Greece after one of Richard Wolff's students got in power.
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually brought that up in one of your old videos. You know, when people pointed out, you know, Richard Wolff, one of his students, got into power in Greece and he destroyed the economy. I say, yeah, but the Marxists, but the Church of Socialism will just say, oh well, he didn't do the religion correctly.
Yeah.
That's how they act. That's how
Russ,
they act.
That's a misquote. That was Gerald Ford that said that, not Thomas Jefferson. But it is a great quote. Government enough to supply everything you need is big enough to take everything you have.
You know,
But it wasn't Jefferson. It wasn't Jefferson.
You know what's one misquote from Thomas Jefferson I really hate people saying is when they said, "Oh well, Thomas Jefferson said that we should change the Constitution every 20 years." No, he said we should change the government, and he said
we should have a revolution every 20 years.
Yeah, he wasn't saying we should change the law of the land every 20 years. He's saying that the Constitution in its current state is largely good, and in order to maintain that, we have to overthrow the government every 20 years. Otherwise, they'll just grow and grow from there. So we kind of have to, start fresh.
The tree of liberty must be, I think, replenished from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. I believe I've got that.
Yeah,
right.
but a lot of people are saying, yeah, but that shows the founding fathers were perfectly okay with radically changing the United States. No, they weren't. People complain, that, oh, the Constitution by its strict codes is so bureaucratic and long and all that. And it's like, well, yeah, that was the point.
It's not actually that long. I mean, you can read it in, just.
Well, I don't mean long as in like long to read. I mean long as in if something major is going to happen, it's designed to take years, if not decades. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of the point, because if a government can change all willy-nilly, that's not stable. That's how societies
but what Jefferson was saying was, probably 20 years from now, they're going to start ignoring the Constitution. And so you need to have another revolution to get them to obey the Constitution again.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, Thomas Jefferson is part of the reason why the Constitution is the way it is, because the original Constitution, from what you mentioned, actually gave the state a crap ton of power, but a lot of the Federalists, basically said, we are not signing this Constitution unless you actually show us signs that there'll be a limited government and a Bill of Rights. And finally, Alexander Hamilton's like, fine, have it your way, I'll allow it. Yeah, I don't get why we celebrate.
Well, it was really Madison. I think Hamilton was kind of fighting it all the way, but Madison put it in by making the 9th and 10th Amendments to try and alleviate the problems that he and Hamilton had with the Bill of Rights, which was that people would take the Bill of Rights and assume that would be a limited enumeration of rights, and you only had the rights that were mentioned, and that was which is what they're doing anyway. So
in all honesty, I kind of hate the fact that we still teach Alexander Hamilton as a wise American politician, and he is important to U.S. history, but he's not a guy whose ideas we should be embracing, because he had a completely different idea of how America should have been compared to guys like Madison and Jefferson.
Yeah,
he didn't even want a United States. He actually wanted a central group, and instead of states, there'd be like, I forgot what he called them, but they would basically be districts.
He wanted Washington to be king for life.
Yeah.
And Washington said, no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I will say one of the first mistakes the Founding Fathers did that I not setting a clear cap on how long a leader could run. I read
you're dropping out again.
Okay, I was about to say, initially, when they ultimately decided that, they'd be and also run for re-election, and this rule to all politicians. Now, it did apply to the presidency, but the biggest problem is that we still have it, because that's the reason why senators and representatives are rules.
Yeah, you're definitely dropping out again some more.
Why do I even bother?
Yeah.
I'm getting annoyed by this.
If I knew how to fix it, I would, believe me.
Yeah, it's like... Yeah. I was about to say, I think the biggest mistake that our founding fathers did make with the Constitution is not establishing clear, term limits for politicians, because that's partially the reason why we're in this.
I think what was it that L. Neil Smith said? Something like that. The best thing the founding fathers could have done, the best change they could have made to the Constitution would be to make it so that any politician who was disobeying the Constitution, trying to ram through an unconstitutional law, or execute an unconstitutional law or something like that, should be executed publicly on the White House lawn.
Yeah,
that would have made a difference.
Also, Shane, here's another thing of people not considering history. There's a big push, to make Washington, D.C. a state in the United States, and And, it's like, yeah, we have all these people, non-politician people living in Washington, D.C., and they want their rights represented. But the irony is that, if I recall correctly, Washington, D.C. was never supposed to have quote-unquote normal people.
No, it
was
wasn't supposed to be a population center.
Yeah, it was strictly, that's where politicians went. It was basically to serve as the offices of the politicians. They would go there or serve their time, and when their terms of service was done and they weren't reelected, they left.
Yeah, I mean, what you need to do is take those population centers, make them a state, but still not let, like, the White House shouldn't be in a state, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, people fail to realize Washington, D.C. is not supposed to be a state for a reason. Yeah. Because that would give, Congress and the executive branch, that would give them way too much political power that they already are abusing.
Yeah.
Because apart from having federal power, they'd also have state power. And as the Constitution is supposed to establish, the states are supposed to be more powerful than the federal government. The local governments are supposed to be more powerful than the state governments, and the people are supposed to be more powerful than all of them combined.
Well, from what responding to what Rusk and Kabilt are saying in the chat, it was really supposed to be the Second Amendment. Like we were saying with Thomas Jefferson a little bit ago, what is supposed to enforce the Constitution is the fact that the people are armed. A lot of people don't know this. John Adams and everyone was saying, okay, celebrate this day, that we passed independence, with fireworks. And yeah, fireworks were commonly used, in celebrations then. But it was also the fact that they wanted that celebration every year with fireworks to remind the government that the people had explosives.
Yeah, actually, the whole thing about the Second Amendment being important, I think going back to what I was saying about the EU, that's actually the reason why we see that, because the thing is, we hear about all these censorships and all that, but here's the thing, the European Union, a lot of their nations, they do have, pretty much, freedom of speech, religion, and all that, and it's very similar to the U.S. First Amendment, but because it's difficult for the people to fight back, the state it's easier for them to get away with saying, oh, well, we're going to pass this, rule so you don't offend people, and it's difficult to fight back, whereas in the United States, it's difficult to pass a lot of censorship laws, without people throwing a riot, which is why when politicians in the U.S. want to do it, they often do it via an earmark or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's why people were saying, oh, well, the Second Amendment's only supposed to apply to muskets. It's like, no, our founding fathers were directly talking about cannons and warships and things like that being, held by, in private hands, so that,
Yeah. Oh yeah, and like you said, well, if you only want the Second Amendment to apply to firearms, then fine. Then your freedom of speech only applies to soapboxes. Your freedom of the press only applies to newspapers, and your freedom of religion only applies to denominations of Christianity, preferably Protestantism.
Yep.
Yeah. Actually, it's pretty funny about freedom of religion, because that was brought up. A lot of people love to say, well, the founding fathers wanted the United States to be a Christian nation. Well, when the United States was having problems with the North African Muslim tribes, one of the problems was the Islamic tribes were like, yeah, well, why should we trust you? After all, a lot of your guys are Christians. It's like, and Thomas Jefferson more or less said, the United States, yeah, our population is Christian, but politically we're secular, and we don't pick sides in a religious ideology, basically.
That was actually written into the Treaty of Tripoli. The United States is in no way founded on the Christian religion, and as a treaty duly passed by Congress under the Constitution, that is part of the supreme law of the land.
Yeah, it's...
How many decades or so before a libertarian becomes president?
I think that's gonna take, basically it's gonna take either a societal collapse or some sort of civil war to happen. And even then, I doubt it would last or anything, because
I mean, they're not gonna let it. They're not going to, let them in the debates. They're not going to let them, give the news media is going to keep marginalizing them if they cover them at all.
And sadly, even if a libertarian does take power, because there have been some quote-unquote libertarian leaders in the past, what often happens is the political elites and all that, some of the political activists spread lies and they'll say, oh, hey, look how bad it is. Look at, and they're going to elect the person, That's kind of sort of what happened with Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, you're dropping out again. You're dropping out again.
Margaret Thatcher wasn't, but she did implement, some is and all that. And
you're dropping out. We can't hear what you're saying. Ron Paul did not almost become president. He didn't even almost, pass the primary because again they had rigged everything against him.
Well, I was about to say,
it's weird because I can hear Darth just fine.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. And everyone else is coming through fine. You're coming through fine. Esso was coming through fine. It's only Darth that's dropping out.
I'll just say this to Vega then, and you can explain it to Shane if he doesn't understand. I was about to say, Margaret Thatcher, she was no libertarian by the stretch, but she did implement some free market, policies, and from what I read, it did very great things to the United Kingdom. And how did the people repay it? They said, Margaret Thatcher took away our government, our government, welfare and all that. And they made up all these lies. And shortly after she got into power, guys like Tony Blair took over. And
well, there were all these like it was called the Winter of Discontent. All these labor disputes because all these workers hated things the government was doing. They blamed Margaret Thatcher from that when that was before she got elected. In fact, that was one of the reasons why she got elected was the Winter of Discontent.
Yeah, and really from what I'm seeing, people always talk about, well, labor unions, were weakened by her. Yeah, the big powerful ones that had political power prior to her being elected. That's the reason they were whining. It wasn't because she was oppressing the workers. It's because she took away their political power when previously they had it.
All right, we gotta wrap this up, guys, because it's 10 o'clock. So anything else you want to get off your chest?
Well, I have this weird looking alien thing on my chest. I don't know if I should have it taken a look at.
I don't know. Does he help out around the house? Does he help make the beds and all that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually, I saw a joke like that where the doctor's like, so is there anything you want to get off your chest? And this one guy says, well, I do have this weird looking purple rash, and when I poke it, it gives up pus. I mean, I've been trying to ignore it, but should I have a doctor take a look at it? That's a funny thing.
The NBMI, the Libertarian Party, are hardly libertarian. LOL. Actually, Jo Jorgensen filed to run as libertarian. She was Harry Brown's 1996 running mate, and I just heard, I think it was a couple days ago, that Jacob Hornberger is going to run. So we might have a couple of good options to choose from this time.
I will say this about the Libertarian Party. The thing I find so hilarious is when people love to say that there's a bridge between libertarianism and extreme, right-wing like Nazism. And one example they use is that one, who took that Latin name, who would practice pagan, sacrificial religions and all that. And they say, well, he ran as a libertarian. Yeah, and did you also read the fact that he was kicked out of the party?
Yeah. Manny Cabilta was not started by Rothbard. It was started by David Nolan.
Yeah, every time you hear the story about, oh, well, there was this one libertarian, he ran as a libertarian, but he was quoting Adolf Hitler, and he was talking about how evil Jews are, and it's like, yeah, and I guess you must have missed the part where the Libertarian Party said this guy is not a libertarian, and we've kicked him out.
Cinema Scum, how you doing? Just in time for us to be signing off, unfortunately, but you got anything to say, Vega, before we sign off?
I'd just like to say Shane Killian is thebomb.com.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. Time for me to get going. So
okay.
Thanks to everyone. We had a couple of donations. This last one didn't show. I don't think the PayPal donations show up on the screen like that. But a couple of subscribers, a couple of pledges. So that was good.
A couple people gave tipping you $1.
Yeah, well, this last one was $6.66, so gotta love
that. $6.66. Yeah. Oh, great! Now we gotta call the priest.
We have to do an exercise. You have to exercise the evil money.
You got $6.66 and a Harry Potter book. Oh, heaven have mercy! I'm gonna have to call the Vatican for this.
All right, so thanks to both Darths and Esso and everyone who participated in the chat, especially that Zur guy. I forget his full name, but that was some good stuff in there, and he donated too. So it was great. You can have good socialists come in here and engage us in conversation, and that's the proof.
Oh yeah, and they say we're a bubble that kicks out socialists. Oh no, every now and then we get a socialist coming in here. We just want you to actually, act reasonable and debate reasonably.
Not like those couple of people I had to kick out of the chat.
Yeah, not those people. Yeah, not those people that are like, well, how do you explain this? Well, that can be explained by that. You're a fascist.
Well, this wasn't even that. This was like, oh, you libertarians, you just all have autism and things like that. It's like, whatever, go away. But no, but thanks to everyone else. I don't thank the trolls, but thanks to everyone else, and thanks to everyone who supports, of course, and thank you for watching. And until next time, stay strong